It makes sense to be surprised or disappointed in a new credit. You're going in with no personal experience, just hearsay or your own assumptions. But what about rides that you've been on before? I found that my rides are never the same from year to year, and the fewer times I ride something, the more likely that my opinion will drastically change. Over the years, a ride may also get rougher, or your perspective will change as you add more and more credits. A ride that seemed amazing 12 years ago may seem tame by today's standards. On the other hand, you may have gotten a bad ride in the past, and with some better maintenance, or some other reason, it blows you away this time. I experienced these shifts in opinion a lot during my 2020 coaster trips, and today I'm going to reflect on them. These are the coasters that shot up and down my rankings after 2020. The good news is that I have 10 coasters that gave me positive vibes, versus 5 that let me down. So I'll double up on the good ones for every bad one. The 5th biggest loser was Thunderbird at Holiday World. This was the last B&M wing coaster that I rode out of the 4 in the US. And after my first ride in 2016, I knew immediately that it was my favorite. The launch, the inversions, the smoothness, the near miss in the shack. It was the most creative and the most forceful when comparing it to Gatekeeper, X-Flight, and Wild Eagle. I was only able to swing one ride in 2020, and it was in the second row, and it just did nothing for me. It was still smooth, and the near miss was still good, but it felt extremely forceless. This may not be a shock for a B&M looping coaster, but it's not how I remembered this ride from my last 2 trips before this one. Maybe if I rode it in the back it would have been better, but with just the one ride, I left with a much lower opinion. The 10th biggest winner was Phoenix at Knoebels. I had a whole video about my 2020 experience on this, so I'll just give you the highlights. When I first rode this in 2018, it was raining, and I felt like it didn't live up to the hype. So I got back to the park in 2020, where it was raining a little less, and there were even fewer people in the park, and I found new appreciation for the back row. After 2018, I deemed this as a front row ride. Now, I think it's definitely a back row ride, though some people suggested Car 1 Row 3 is the magic seat, just like on Magnum. I'll have to try that next time I'm at the park. But the back row rides I got in 2020 were way more violent than last time, and I got some serious pops of airtime coming over some of the hills before even getting to the crazy finale. I think I still haven't seen Phoenix at its best, but I definitely got a better version of it in 2020. The 9th biggest winner was Fahrenheit at Hershey Park. I got a pair of rides in 2018, and I thought it was pretty solid, and considered it for the best ride in the park. It's not really my favorite type of ride, focusing on inversions, but it's redeemed by its beyond vertical drop and intense moments in the second half. In 2020, I really felt like these intense moments were accentuated, and it felt a lot like Maverick at Cedar Point. I don't remember it tossing me around as much as it did in 2020, and that's really the main reason that I bumped it up in my rankings. It felt like a blitz coaster. The 4th loser was Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. I can't complain too much about this RMC. It's the star attraction at Kentucky Kingdom, and when I rode this back in 2018, it destroyed my expectations. I really wasn't all that hyped for it, and it found its way into my top 15 because of all those powerful airtime moments. I got 2 more rides this year, and even though it was still strong, it was nowhere near the level of the 6 rides my first time around. Funny thing about this, those awesome 2018 rides were in the morning, and this year I got rides in the afternoon and at night. So you'd think the ride would have been warmed up, but I think the half capacity trains really hurt it this time, and it just wasn't running as fast. The 8th winner was West Coast Racers at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I rode this for the first time on December 21st of last year, so most of my rides came during the first 3 months of 2020. This is the only coaster on this list that I didn't ride while out on the road, but it's new enough for me to still be moving it around on my rankings. It started off around my number 100 spot, and it's moved all the way up into the 70s. It's Leapfrog Tatsu, and it's now my number 3 coaster in the park. This has so many elements between the 2 tracks, and it seems like I find something new about the ride each time I ride it. So comparing my opinion this December to my opinion last December, it's way more favorable, and I'm really happy that Magic Mountain went with this ride, even though it didn't seem like it made a lot of sense in their lineup. The 7th winner was Skyrush at Hershey Park. I made a video with what basically amounted to a backhanded apology to Skyrush, since I enjoyed it more after my 2020 rides because it was less painful, but it also made me realize that the layout was kinda dumb. So even though I hated on it a little, I still raised it up about 100 spots on my rankings. The lap bar sucks, but it wasn't as dreadful this time, and I thought the first drop was a lot better than I remembered. Same with that awesome first ejector hill, as well as the switchback element near the end of the ride. If a ride has 3 awesome elements, then it deserves some love, even if the rest isn't that good. I now enjoy riding Skyrush. It's not torture for me anymore, and that makes it a winner in my book. The third loser was Twister at Knoebels. I only had one ride on this from before, on that same rainy day that I rode Phoenix back in 2018. But I should mention that the skies opened up and destroyed us while we were on Twister. This was some of the heaviest rain that I've ever experienced on a coaster. I tried my best to focus on the ride and not the needles hitting my face, and I came away thinking the ride was fast but forceless. Fast forward to 2020, and I tried to get another back row ride, but ended up getting the front because of strict assigned seating. It turns out that my opinion from 2018, through the rain and all, was right. It is pretty fast, but it doesn't seem to pull any forces whatsoever, just some drops and turns. If you like Twister, and I know a lot of you do, some even more than Phoenix, let me know what you like about it and where I should sit to get the best ride, because the very front and the very back were very disappointing. My 6th biggest winner was Thunder Run at Kentucky Kingdom. I rode this once in 2018, and I thought the ride was pretty bland. Not too rough, but definitely lacking airtime or any real thrill. I got a front and a back row ride in 2020, and the ride actually blew my mind for the first half. I was getting almost standing airtime on every hill in that first half, front and back, with the front row airtime being even stronger than the back. If the second half could keep those same forces, it would easily be a top 50 coaster. But the second half is basically straight track and turns. This is kinda like Skyrush. It would be better if it was a more complete ride. But if it can throw some awesome elements at you, then it's worth riding. Ride Thunder Run for the first half and then take a nap for the second half. This is my new favorite coaster from the Din Corporation. My 5th biggest winner was Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City. I think my first trip to the park back in 2018 was just a whirlwind. There was so much to take in, so my 2 rides on Powder Keg were kind of a blur. When I got back to the park in 2020, I was able to slow down and take the park in a little more, and Powder Keg was the highlight of that trip. It used to be a water coaster, and it was converted into an S&S air launch coaster. And like all air launches, this is powerful. But this is just the beginning. It kind of acts like a hypercoaster from this point on, with big airtime hills and low to the ground turns before a lift hill, and one more big drop before hitting the brakes. I don't remember getting such awesome airtime on this, and I got to ride it in the front and the back. Each was equally great. Powder Keg gets lost in that Silver Dollar City lineup, and it makes it super underrated. My 2nd biggest loser is from the same park, Wildfire. This B&M looper blew me away with that insane ejector first drop in the back row, before kicking off its huge set of inversions. I got a couple more rides this year, both in the back row, and I did not get that same whip over the drop. So instead of that jolt of airtime, it was just some mild floater. The rattle was also way stronger this time around. I had to pop some Advil after my first ride to get rid of a pretty nasty headache. I had such a high opinion of Wildfire after 2018, but there wasn't much to get excited about this time around. Maybe these issues were caused by the half-full train, so hopefully in the future it can regain its 2018 form. My 4th winner was the Legend at Holiday World. I've never liked this CCI Woody. It focused more on laterals than airtime, and as it's gotten older, it's gotten unbearably rough. I specifically remember one jackhammer moment on my 2018 ride that was one of the most painful elements I've ever experienced. The park has been diligent about retracking portions of the ride over the years, but it wasn't until my 2020 ride that I felt that it did any good. 18 years after my first ride, I finally came to appreciate the ride for what it was. It was painless, it was out of control. It even had a couple of great airtime moments. It was actually enjoyable, and I would have gone back in line for another round if the line wasn't so long. If I get back to Hollywood Nights next year, I'll be looking forward to riding the Legend, which is something that I've never even considered before now. My 3rd biggest winner was Magnum XL200 at Cedar Point. Even though this coaster is over 30 years old, I seem to like it more and more every time I ride it. I bumped it into my top 20 as of 2019, and I was able to swing one ride in 2020, very back row, and it was easily the best ride that I had at Cedar Point that day. I should mention that I didn't get the ride Steel Vengeance in the back row on this trip, which was too bad, so my Magnum ride was able to top it. The final run of airtime hills is awesome, and it's the ride's signature moment. And the airtime didn't disappoint this time either. But it was the hills leading up to the finale that are usually average at best that I found throwing me out of my seat this time. Cedar Point keeps this ride running so great, and I hope they keep it around for the long haul. I didn't have a lot of room to move it up in my rankings, but it rose enough to be my new number 2 at the park. My number 1 loser is the coaster that Magnum passed up for 2nd place at Cedar Point, Millennium Force. I've loved this coaster for so long, and it was my number one at the park until Steel Vengeance came along. But little by little, I've been underwhelmed by it as it keeps dropping in my rankings. 2020 was especially disappointing. I basically got nothing out of it. 2 disclaimers. It was one of the first trains of the day, and the train was only half full. It just felt like it was going slow, and speed is the main reason that this coaster exists. The airtime hills and the overbanks were weak, and dare I say, forceless. I don't want to drop it too far in my rankings, and I know the conditions were about as bad as they can get, but I'll be back in 2021 to give it another ride. Up to this point, I've never gotten off Millennium Force and been truly disappointed, and that's exactly how I felt this time. My number 2 winner was Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom. I was so hyped up for this before my first ride in 2018, and after 3 laps, I thought it was pretty average. It cracked my top 50 for the ejector airtime moments, but I didn't like the lap bars, and I felt like it was kind of meandering around a lot in the middle of the ride. I took these low expectations into my 2020 rides, and it was a complete 180. I did not get stapled. The ride was hauling. I was flying out of my seat on every hill, and because I had some extra room, the airtime finale was phenomenal. It was everything I wanted the ride to be in 2018. I have no idea what was different from one year to the next, especially with the lighter and half-full trains this time. But this was a coaster that went from borderline top 50 to solid top 50. Finally, my number 1 winner was Voyage at Holiday World. For my first ride in 2016, I knew this ride was something special, but my 2 complaints were that it had weak airtime and it was too rough. These 2 complaints were erased with my 2020 rides. You can't just claim that my higher opinion of the Voyage was because of the trimless night rides. I thought my trim day rides were amazing, and I said it's the best I've ever seen the ride operate. The trimless night rides were just the cherry on top. I felt zero pain throughout the whole course. The park did an amazing job retracking it last year, especially on that return trip back to the station, where in the past, I would be praying for the ride to be over. And those weak pops of airtime in the spaghetti bowl and the return trip turned into strong ones. It's almost a perfect ride at this point, and it deserved a massive bump in my rankings. How far it moved up? Well, you'll just have to wait a few days for my top 50 to come out. Those are the biggest winners and losers from coasters that I got re-rides on in 2020. If you want to see the biggest winners and losers from the new credits that I picked up this year, click the card in my end screen, or check out the link in my description. Which coasters changed your opinions the most in 2020, good or bad? And what do you think of the coasters on this list? Sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like, because that really helps out the channel. So does subscribing, so please do so if you want to see more content like this. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.